Good morning. My name is Katie Yates, and I'm a marketing specialist for the Maine Department of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife. Welcome to our monthly coffee chat series where I meet with different staff from our department to chat about recreation, management, and conservation over some coffee. Today, I am meeting with the superintendent of the Maine Wildlife Park in Gray, Howie Powell. We'll be chatting about what visitors can expect for visiting the park this summer, some gamekeeper stories, and what to do if you find an injured or abandoned animal. For those of you watching at home, you can join the conversation at any time by typing your questions and comments in the chat box. And I love when people say where they're joining us from, so you can go ahead and do that. We will answer questions as time allows and usually at the end of our conversation. And just as a reminder, this video is recorded and will be available later on the department's YouTube channel. So Howie, thank you so much for joining me today.
You're welcome. Good morning.
Good morning. A little bit overcast. The weather's a little bit different than it's been recently. Kind of nice to not have it be so humid.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So Howie, for those who aren't familiar with your role in the department, can you tell us a little bit about your background and what it is that you do?
Sure. Again, my name's Howie. I'm the superintendent at the Wildlife Park. I've worked here for around 10 years, and I started out as a gamekeeper, and within a few years, I became the assistant superintendent, and last year, became the superintendent. And so I hadn't worked in my field, but I had a degree. I have degrees in wildlife biology, and just it seemed like I wanted a job that I enjoyed more, so I made this change to work here.
Great, thank you. So can you talk a little bit about the history of the park?
Sure. The park originally started as a pheasant rearing facility. They used to raise from 40 to 60,000 pheasants a year to release in the wild. Excuse me. And it's sort of over the years morphed into what it is now. It was a place where when people had animals, they had cages and they knew how to take care of animals. So it became sort of, just over the years, it definitely morphed into what it is. And in the early 80s, the pheasant program went out, and there was kind of a time of limbo, and the state was still funding it. So they decided that they were going to shut it down because it really didn't have a purpose anymore. And then the public kind of got involved and was very upset about it closing. People loved the park. It was called the Game Farm at that point, and people still refer to it as the Game Farm. So yeah, there was a group called the Friends of the Maine Wildlife Park got together, and they pushed for some legislation. And in the early 90s, excuse me, it became, the park could operate as long as it operated under its own incomes and revenues. So as long as the park can operate in the black, it continues as is. Excuse me.
And what are some of the wildlife that you have at the park currently?
Absolutely. We have over 30 species of different wildlife. One thing I think that's, we only have Maine wildlife with a few small exceptions that are throwbacks to history. Like we have some peacocks here. They're not native to Maine. And we still have some pheasants, which actually are not native also. And we have a few extirpated species, but most of our animals here are historically native to the state of Maine. So you don't see any exotics. We don't have tigers and elephants. We're trying to focus on Maine wildlife so people become familiar with Maine wildlife, and just as a place for them to learn about it in a safe place where we have not taken animals from the wild. So it's kind of I find it a win-win for everybody.
And what are some examples of some of you have quite a variety of Maine.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes. So we have lots of small mammals like raccoons, groundhogs, beavers, fisher, porcupines. That's what we kind of call our small mammals. And of course, we also have flying squirrels. And then we have some larger things like cats. We have bobcat, lynx, and mountain lion, which again, that's in the historically native because it's no longer native. We have red fox, gray fox, coyotes. We have 2 black bears that are quite old right now, but we have 2 black bears, one of which is interesting because it's a cinnamon-faced black bear. So a lot of people just look and automatically assume it's a brown bear. And then we have, of course, our kind of crowning animal is the moose. We have one moose right now. We have one bull. And the moose is probably 80% of the people who come here. That's what they're focused on. They want to see a moose. And then we have lots of raptors, and we have a songbird exhibit now. So we have around 80 different animals total. Some of those are multiple species, multiples of the same species, but it's about 80 animals, and there's quite a lot. We also have a lot of turtles, some snakes. So the songbirds is relatively new to us, but we have about 10 or 15 in there right now.
I didn't realize that you guys had songbirds.
Yep. So we just built it in between 2018 and 19, we built it. And of course, we don't take animals from the wild, which is something I was going to get on later anyway. So we don't just build an exhibit and then fill it with animals that we can find. We're more our purpose is to have a home for an animal that can't go back to the wild. So it kind of serves a dual purpose. It gives that animal a place to live and also be an ambassador for the species. So right now we've got 10 or 15 birds in there. And it's still, again, relatively new to us, but it's going quite well.
Great, thank you. So I know that some things are changing at the park. There was a reservation system, and there were some restrictions due to COVID. What are some things that visitors can expect this summer when they go to visit all these great animals that you just listed?
So at this point, we up until June, you had to make a reservation to come to the park. We don't have to do that anymore. We have most of our COVID restrictions have lifted, but we have a few. Like if you're indoors in a building, you do have to wear a mask. We don't differentiate between people who are vaccinated or not. If you're indoors, you wear a mask, unless you're alone. But so it's only a few places: the restrooms and the nature store. So there's only those few places, but you don't have to worry about it in the outside. There's no mandate for a mask outdoors. And it's just since the beginning of June, it's kind of getting back to our normal attendance schedule, where you can just come when you want. You show up. We are open now. We're trying 2 late evenings a week. So Thursdays and Fridays, we're open an extra 2 hours, which seems to be very popular with some people. So yeah, it's kind of back to normal with minus the only, I guess the biggest thing that it's not exactly a COVID change, but it initiated the change, is that we don't have animal feeders right now. The fish hatchery still has fish feeders, but all of our feeding machines, we stopped because of the pandemic, because it's a very difficult thing to clean. And we talk about poop a lot here, and some of the bears, when we stopped those feeders, they had the best poop they'd had in decades. And so in good conscience, knowing how much better it is for their gut to not have those feeders, we can't go back to having that. It was actually a big source of income for the park too, but we can't go back to that now. So, and also feeding wildlife is kind of a mixed message. So we're trying to kind of get rid of that. So the fish hatchery still has a feeder, but we don't have any in the park right now.
Actually, yeah, do you want to talk a little bit about the fish hatchery? I know that it's not part of the park, but you can access it through the wildlife park.
Absolutely. You can you walk down the hill. It's attached, again, part of the department, but just a gate between them. And you can walk down and you can walk along the raceways and see the fish in different stages. And then you get to the end, which is the round pond, which is kind of the popular place. And that's where the feeders are. And it's really nice down there. It's nice, cool air in the summer because you've got the air off the cool water. So it's very nice.
It is. It's a very interesting spot. It's cool that you can go there and see what's going on with it.
Absolutely.
And the fish. So let's talk about programs, because I know that a lot of people anticipate events and programs at the park, and historically you guys have had them down there. What can people expect this summer?
Okay, so yeah, that's something I should have brought up. So for this year, just because nothing can be set up in a moment's notice. They all take quite a lot of planning. Because we started in the middle of a pandemic, we decided to not have any big programs or events this year. We didn't think it was the right year to encourage large crowds to gather and things that would bring people together. So we decided not to. If the things go the way they are right now, we might try to have one event late in October, which is our Harvest Fest. But that's the only one that's even possible for this year at this point. And events are a big part of our summer here. People people look forward to things here all year, like the powwow, Fairy House Day. There's a lot of things that are very popular, and it's been kind of odd not having them for 2 years now.
Are any educational programs, talks in the amphitheater or at some of the animal exhibits, are any of those happening this year?
Yeah, we actually just, again, with our lifting of restrictions in June, at the beginning of June, we've also started, again, we're trying to be very thoughtful about it because we don't want to gather people together. So we've kind of changed where we do things. We try to not, when we do them, we don't want to block walkways where a lot of people are going to have to kind of walk through. So we are doing them more at the amphitheater. And so people can spread out a little bit more. And we are going to have daily talks. And since we've stopped, the bear feeders, and that was such a popular thing for people to do, we're also going down twice a day in a certain time range to kind of throw snacks out for the bears to bring them out so people can kind of get a better look at them. They're old and they just like to sleep a lot. So, but food gets them up. So yes, we are doing things like that. We are starting tours again now, which we didn't do any tours, again, the congregation. So yeah, things are slowly getting back to normal.
And I know you guys have some food trucks coming.
We do on those late those late Thursday and Fridays. We're trying to kind of let some different people give a different demographic coming into the park. So we thought we'd try it on certain Thursdays and Fridays. We have food trucks coming in, and normal hours of the park are 9:30 to 4:30 for the gate, and people can stay in the park until 6. But on that Thursday and Friday, the gate is open until 6:30. People can stay until 8, and we have food trucks when we can get one scheduled. And it's just kind of something different that we're trying. And the food trucks have been awesome.
I think also it's a good reminder for people, if they are planning their visit, that it's cash only at the park, isn't it?
It is at the gatehouse, and the nature store does take cards, and people sometimes seem frustrated about it. And I think the thing, because we do operate under our own income, is it for us to lose a few percentage points on taking cards at the gate would actually be a big hit to our budget. And that's why we haven't. We will be soon at some point. That's the way the world is going. We're going to have to do that. But right now it's been a big hit to take 2 or 3% out. So we do it, excuse me, we take cash and checks at the gatehouse. The snack shack takes cash, and the nature store takes cash, checks, and cards.
And it's a lot of volunteers that are helping out with.
Yeah, historically around 40% of our labor is volunteer. So it's amazing, some of the people who come together to help this place, and how many people put their heart and soul into it. Like all of our gardens, excuse me, all of our gardens are done by volunteers, and they are better than a place you go to see gardens. They're really phenomenal. They do a great job, and it's all volunteer. They raise the money for them. They have a plant sale to help fund it. They do an amazing job.
That's great. That's awesome. If someone's interested in volunteering, where could they potentially learn more about that?
So there is a link on our website, or they could stop by and fill out a volunteer application. One thing I think is important to say about that is a lot of people want to volunteer with animal contact. That's a little bit difficult to do. It's more all the outside duties that the extraneous things that we use volunteers for. But it's, excuse me, it's a wide variety of things people volunteer for. We have people who volunteer to build things. We have people who volunteer to work in the gatehouse, work in the snack shack, to do gardens, to help with trash, anything. It's a pretty wide variety. The only thing is, I think people should know that there's not animal contact.
Yeah, that is probably good to mention. But speaking of that, you've been working at the wildlife park in different capacities for a very long time, and you've had lots of interactions, I'm sure, with the wildlife that are kept there. Do you have any good stories or interactions that you'd like to share?
Oh man, it's almost hard to know where to start with that. It's one of the things about working here is that you will never be bored. And you never know what you're going to do. If you think you come to work knowing what you're doing, you're wrong, because it never works that way. So I might be welding on a tractor, and a half an hour later might be amputating a toe from a bear. You never know. Our vet came out and we did that last year because he had some kind of growth on a toe. So it's just really, it's almost hard to explain how many animals the contact that we have with them, and the things you learn over time is like you start to learn. First of all, we talk about poop a lot. Like I said, it's a very important piece of health. And so my first week here, we had an old lynx, and he was acting kind of funny. I hadn't worked here very long, and I didn't really know what to do. I had just been here for a short time, and turns out he did have a bowel obstruction. So now I'm trying to figure out how to put him in a box to take to a vet. I didn't know who our vet was at the time, so I was calling vets to see who would see a lynx, which quite often they would say, "What's a lynx?" So those weren't the ones I wanted to go to. I found one. So I had worked here for 8 days, and at 10 o'clock at night, my kids and they drove with me in a truck because I had my kids that day. They were in a truck with a lynx, taking it to the vet because it was just an interesting thing. And it was just amazing to see how good people are with them. One of my coworkers came over and helped me put it in a crate because I didn't know how, I didn't know the protocol. It just happened immediately as soon as I started. I can't even think of better specific stories. We deal a lot with medical things. We take fawns in every year. I think one important thing is that, sorry, I kind of jump around a little bit, but an important note to say is that we don't really traditionally do rehab here, which I think is a big misnomer. People think that's what we do. People want to drop off animals to us. And I wanted to say that the one thing we be careful a lot, and it's kind of prominent in my mind right now, is fawns. There are certain years we get a lot of fawns. Some of them are legitimately orphaned. Some are hit by cars. Some of the moms were hit by cars. Some of the fawns were hit by cars. But I just wanted to bring that point that we deal with them a lot. We don't, that's the only animal that comes to the park and then might be released. It's because we do not do traditional rehab. We are more the geriatric end home when an animal can't be rehabilitated. And there's kind of there's a network of places and people where an animal goes to rehab and the rehabilitator determines it can't be rehabilitated. And there's kind of this circle. People know it's whoever has a hole for that animal at that moment. And sorry, I kind of jump around a lot there.
No, that's okay. Let's dive into that. So I do, people find out that I work for the department and they'll say, "Oh, I know somebody who's having issues with woodchucks," or "I know somebody who they had an injured animal. Can that animal go to the wildlife park?" And the answer is really no, right?
That's correct. That's correct. So the first step is you should call, depending on the animal situation, but you can call your local biologist or your local warden, depending on the situation, and they can evaluate. Quite often the best thing to do, and we have lots of press releases for if you care, leave them there. Out of the best of their hearts, sometimes people kidnap animals because they think they're doing something good. So it's really hard. The best thing you can do for that animal, its best chance of survival, is to leave it with mom if that's in any way possible. Mom can do a lot of things we just can't do. So yes, you can call your biologist, you can call the warden service. Depending on what it is, you can call an animal control officer for your town, depending on who that is, where you are, and what they have. There are also wildlife removal specialists that you can call, and you can find those online. And you can call them and have them, and they'll take you to a rehabber if that's what they deem necessary. But yeah, so it's not the place to take them. People often will just drop boxes of animals by our door, which is not good for the animal. It does not do them any good. There are some amazing rehabilitation places in Maine. They know what they're doing. They're great at what they do. And that's where these animals should go to have the best chance. We, again, are not here to take animals from the wild. We are here to help animals survive in the wild and teach people about the wildlife of Maine.
Right, and it's an important distinction that the wildlife park is you're not collecting animals.
That's correct. We don't want animals that can't go back to the wild, or we only want animals that can't go back to the wild. We don't want to make more animals. So we fix our animals. So our animals can't breed. We either fix them or give them contraceptive shots. So we don't breed and make more animals that can't go back to the wild. We don't participate in the zoo trade, and just don't remove animals from the wild. That's kind of, I think that's our niche, and I think that's a very important distinction to make.
Great, that's excellent. Thank you. So we do have some links that we can provide to those who are watching for conflicts with wildlife. We do have some resources for nuisance wildlife. So if you are running into some of those species like woodchucks or squirrels or something that are consistently in your yard, we do have some resources for that on our website. We'll post a link for that. And then also, if you do encounter an injured animal or a baby animal, what are some things you should ask yourself? We can provide some resources for that in the chat. But speaking of some of these things that I think people are very mesmerized by wildlife, and the opportunity to get up close and personal with wildlife is kind of something that I think people don't always get a chance to do like you do. And so there's interest in it, and they like to be a part of that. So people are very excited to see the moose. What are some species that people are often intrigued by once they get to the wildlife park?
Okay, that's a great question. One thing that I think is interesting is the fisher. I don't think people realize really what a fisher is. Of course, the fact that they're called a fisher cat in common language, because they're not a cat, of course. So people are actually surprised when they see what it is, because most people haven't seen one in the wild. And I think the fact that it's essentially a big weasel throws people off quite often. They think it's going to be a really big animal. I think that's one that really, that's one that throws people off. How cute certain animals are. Animals that you don't think of as being cute, porcupine and beaver, are just the cutest animals to watch. And people are mesmerized, like watching Miriam, our beaver, eat. She'll throw a temper tantrum. If you don't give her food, it's amazing how, of course, we anthropomorphize these things, and we obviously give human traits, in our heads to these animals, but it's amazing how much personality each one has and how great they are to watch sometimes.
I often hear some of the gamekeepers talk about what a diva the beaver is.
That's a perfect word for her. Actually she will grunt at you and start slamming her feet if you're not doing what she wants you to do. It's unbelievable.
Let's talk about animal enrichment. You are saying that there are some foods that you feed them, and they obviously have habitats. Can you talk a little bit about how you come up with their diets, how you come up with some activities for them?
Absolutely. That's a great one. So our diets are actually well thought out, both by science and also by time. This people here have been caring for animals. We have one employee who's cared for animals here for 44 years. So we have a lot of institutional knowledge that is great. That and science, we really pay a lot of attention to what animals get. We try to mimic their wild diet as much as possible. And we even mimic patterns of eating. Like we will have fast days for animals that are strict carnivores, because in the wild, they wouldn't catch a meal every day. So we do fast days for them. Like our cats eat only meat, because in the wild, that's what cats eat. Sometimes it's surprising what animals like that you wouldn't expect. Like our fisher loves grapes. It's just interesting, the things that you watch an animal in different fishers, of course, over different years, you watch one will go straight for the meat and one will go straight for the fruit. So every animal has different tastes, but we are very, very strict about what we give them as far as quantity, as far as type. There are certain animals, like our beaver, should not get much in the way of sugars. It's not good for them. The sugars they do get are from leaves, so it's a pretty low content of sugar. And so she can't get she doesn't get things like apples and fruit, because it's not good for her gut. Because in the wild, they don't eat that much sugar, that much of that type of sugar. So all of our diets are very specifically laid out. And I think it's very well thought out over time. And also we do take those sometimes, and we have devices to feed them in for enrichment. Enrichment is really important. We've had fewer interns the last couple of years because of the pandemic. So we haven't had as much of an enrichment program, but we're hoping to get that fully back up for next year, where somebody isn't giving enrichment to these animals. Our gamekeepers do it every day, just in the way they feed, if they scatter it, there's all kinds of different things they could do. But we try really hard. We have toys that we can use the word toys. It's a feeding device that the animals can use and get their food out of it. And it stops stereotyping behavior, which is things like pacing. Like since we started enrichment, stereotyping like on our fisher has gone way down. He seems much more adjusted to his space. And so paying attention to that, our gamekeepers do it already when they're feeding and everything. And then also we have normally enrichment interns that do a great job.
And I know that you're always trying to improve the quality of life for these animals. Do you have any habitat enclosure updates that you have planned?
So what we're trying to do at this point is not do anything new, but take what we have and make it the best it can possibly be, whether that means rebuilding it. We're just trying to focus on, before we build new things, we have some great ideas for the future, but we want to make sure that we're doing the best we can for the animals we have right now. So we're kind of focusing back a little bit to make sure that we're meeting their needs as best we possibly can.
And just to reiterate, you said it earlier in the conversation, but I think it is important to express again that the animals that we have at the park cannot be returned to the wild. And
sorry.
Oh no, yeah, but that's the important piece.
Absolutely. There are so many reasons. Running from an orphaned animal that mom couldn't take care of them, like moose. Reintroduction of moose is, somebody can try to rehabilitate a moose, but mom not being there when that moose is young, that moose has a very low chance of survival in the wild if you rehab it and release it. They just don't do well with rehab. Certain animals do well, certain ones don't. So we've got orphaned animals. We've got sometimes easy prey items. Like we have a white raccoon. He's kind of a marshmallow running through the woods, so we don't really want to put him back out there. I started to say something else and I lost it. Oh yeah, so also habituated animals. We've had animals that just get so habituated that they will come up to people and have no fear of humans. So we end up keeping them because sometimes the alternative is euthanization. So we don't want to go that way. So all of these animals have some reason that they can't go back to the wild.
And for those animals that are accustomed to humans, is that because they were kept as pets?
It could be, or it could just be like sometimes it's situational when people like feeding wildlife. They're feeding on their back porch and all of a sudden they want to know why the coyote is so friendly coming up there because it's a buffet every morning. So there's a lot of reasons like that. Sometimes it's people, sometimes it's just situation, but it's amazing sometimes how. Oh, also, I guess I should have also said a lot of ours are injured also. Like foxes, we tend to have quite often car hits. They end up with and often they don't last a real long time because they have some neurological deficit, but they can live out their time here. And we try to be as clear as we can that, and obviously you can't get it completely, but we try to make sure they're not in pain. If they seem like they have a quality of life, we will just let them live out their life here and instead of euthanizing them.
So what are some of the enrichment activities that you have for the moose and some of the other species? It's kind of interesting to think about coming up with games for some of these wild animals.
Oh, absolutely. And it can be very difficult because animals can't ingest certain things. There's so much we try to do. For the moose, we have, there's a thing called a jolly ball. It's like a plasticky rubbery ball. And actually our bull Byron loves to roll it around in his antlers. We will hang it above him and he loves to just kind of play with it with his antlers, and he'll bang it back and forth and roll around. We have 3 tires, like tractor tires, bolted together in his enclosure that he can push around with his antlers, and he'll push them off to one side. And then the next day we move him so he can push them somewhere else. The bears, we have lots of times where we make devices, like we'll hollow out a log and put food in it with small holes, and the bears will roll it around to get the pieces out. We do use some some commercial items also, like Kong devices we can use. They have different feeding devices, enrichment for dogs. It's a little hard sometimes to get one that it will stand up to a mountain lion. We have bought some that were actually made for lions, and it worked pretty well. But even there's a ball in there that they can just bat around whenever they want to. And quite often at night, I'll hear them batting that around at night. So it's like just having something for them to do. It just makes a world of difference.
I also know you have some birds of prey. You have an eagle and some
Yep.
others. Do you do similar activities or things
So
like that?
they're enrichment because they're kind of so hard to deal with, and also birds can be very, very kind of a lot of anxiety. So our presence isn't that great for them. So what we do with them for enrichment is we try to give them their habitat, having plenty of perches. So again, a lot of them are compromised. So we make sure that we have like stepped perches so they can get up to, because the birds like to be up high. So we'll make it stepped so they can actually get up there, even though they can't fly up to the top. We try to see where they like to be and try to put perches and things there. The feeding for them is essentially their enrichment. We try to feed them as natural as we can. They quite often get mice, which what they would get, they're dead mice. They're not live mice. But their diet is most of their enrichment for the raptors. And we do, mentioned eagles. We have a golden eagle and a bald eagle. And then we have lots of owls and hawks, turkey vultures, raven. So we have a lot of different birds, and the ravens especially are one that really, really need a lot of enrichment because they're very intelligent animals.
Wow, yeah, that's really interesting. So what happens to the animals in the winter? The park isn't open to the public. It's a little bit colder. What goes on at the park when people aren't around?
Yeah, that's funny. A lot of people say, well, what do you do in the winter? Well, we don't just stop feeding them for the winter. So some of the animals stay right where they are, like the larger animals in the larger enclosures. Some of them we move to smaller, not heated, but more protected areas. They all have different places, species specific as to what's best for them. Like all the raptors go to a building that it's covered and has a roof, but it's not heated, and they do pretty well. It's kind of south facing, so they get sun. But the animals all stay here to some degree, whether they stay in their exhibit or not. And then we keep access to them through the snow. And there's only 4 of us here in the winter. So we plow, we snow blow, we keep access to the animals. And we do some projects in the winter, but as far as the animals go, it's kind of just taking care of them.
I wonder if that's difficult in the winter. Is it harder to manage some of that?
Oh my God. Think about leaving water for an animal. I mean, sometimes you have to do the water 2 or 3 times a day because it's going to freeze 5 minutes after they get it. As we build new exhibits, we put in things like automatic waters that have heat in them, so their water will stay in liquid form. So as we build new things, we try to make that a priority. But sometimes gaining access can be very, very hard. We get a 30-inch storm. It's not that easy to even get to work, let alone then get around to every animal. It can be a lot of work in the winter.
And this is kind of a 24-hour job, isn't it? The
Oh,
dog can come at any point in time, and you're pretty close by, I think, right?
Absolutely. I live on the property. It's, nothing might happen after hours, but that's pretty unlikely. It's very seldom that we actually, it's not a job where you can say, well, it's 4, I'm done with work for the day. Because if there's animals who need things, excuse me, you have to do them. Baby season is, everybody thinks they're cute, but I'm not a big fan of getting up at 2 o'clock in the morning. So it's just like a human baby. We take care of them, every 4 hours. So there's always something here. There's always some question or something to look at. So it is a 24-hour. It's a lifestyle as much as a job.
And when you say baby season, you mean those fawns that you're getting in? Is that
spring? Anytime we get, yes. So we also sometimes act as a clearinghouse for rehabilitators when somebody like maybe sometimes somebody can't get transportation, or maybe a warden has an animal and they'll bring it here while we find a rehabber for it to go to. So anytime in the spring when you might have babies, that's when we have to, but mostly fawns, yes. Like right now we have a few fawns, and we don't have to get up at 2 o'clock in the morning anymore because they're older, a little bit older now, but they require being watched quite frequently.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are probably interested in what it's like caring for a baby fawn. Maybe they don't realize the commitment level. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. It's so when they first come in, when they're very young, in the first few weeks, they have to eat at least every 4 hours. So we get up and we're donated milk from Pineland Farms. So we pick up free milk from them. They donate it to us. They've been excellent about that. And so we as soon as that happens, we start picking up milk. Depending on how young the animal is, sometimes we'll try to get colostrum, which is that early milk that moms produce right after birth, and get them some of that if they're young enough. We have to determine kind of how old they are, what do they need, how much do they weigh, where should we go from here. And it is an every 4 hour at least commitment at that point. And it does lessen as the time goes on. We wean them generally by August. And yeah, it can be a pretty big commitment, especially, again, as I mentioned, many of our animals are compromised in some way. We always get fawns that are hit by a car. And sometimes they're hard to care for. We're trying to evaluate what's happened. So it is a pretty big commitment sometimes.
What do you think of all the different species that you have at the park? Which one is the most, I guess, challenging to care for?
Challenging, I guess, challenges in different ways. So again, I'm going to go back to poop because that's a big part of my job. Keeping good gut health in certain animals is incredibly difficult. Like keeping good gut health in the moose. That we actually, unlike many facilities, we actually give, because they're browsers. I don't know if everybody knows what that means, but vegetation eating, there's kind of a grazing end of a spectrum and a browsing end where they eat more leaves and bark. So moose are strict browsers, which means they can't eat things like grass. They shouldn't eat things like grass. It's not good for those more simple things aren't as good for their gut. So moose in captivity are very difficult to keep, to feed, and to keep with good gut health. And it's something we discuss almost on a daily basis as to what should we do right now? Where are we? We have, again, I started to say, unlike other facilities, we actually have a browse intern who comes in 3 days a week and picks a dump truck load of browse every other day for them. And they eat it. The moose will eat it all. No matter how many moose there are, they will eat all of it. So instead of a lot of facilities where they get like maybe a half a dozen pieces or something of browse a day, they get a truckload every other day, and they will strip most of it. Even at that, it's just so hard to keep good gut health. And I would say that's the biggest challenge, especially as far as moose. And that's why not a lot of facilities in North America keep moose. It's not a common animal to find in captivity. We've, knock on wood, had pretty good luck because so the last few we've lived, the average is about 10 in captivity for us, for a moose. But the last 2 moose we lost were 12 and 15. Before that, we've lost a few young ones. We had one with an aneurysm. They're very difficult to keep. It's not an easy thing to do. So that's that kind of challenge. Then there's the challenge of dealing with stubborn animals that don't want to go in when they should, and like trying to lock off and stay safe. Sometimes the cats can be pretty hard with that. They can be pretty stubborn. Diets, again, can be challenging for certain animals. There's a lot of different challenges, things you wouldn't expect. And sometimes it's not about the species, it's about the individual and different, like, this fisher is tenfold different than the last fisher we had. And sometimes just their personalities make it either easier or harder.
I'm actually kind of curious about the food aspect. I did not consider actually probably the amount of food that you're dealing with for these? How many truckloads or pounds or do you go through?
So depending on how many moose we have at the time, we actually are able to buy. There's a company that makes a commercial food product. They make food for zoos, and some of them are actually just essentially ground up aspen tree because that's what they eat. It's got other things in it also, but that's the basis for it. So we're able to buy some commercial pelletized diet for the moose. We actually mix 4 different types together right now, as well as a lot of additives, as we're always trying to meet all of their nutritional requirements. And sometimes that can be a little tough to even know what they are. But we buy tons of this commercial and give them, from essentially the time we open to the time we close, they get 3 truckloads of browse every week, which is probably a ton a week. And we buy tons of this feed. So they're by far the most expensive animal to keep, whether you take that in financial or in time. They take the biggest time commitment as well as financial commitment.
Wow. And so for the other species too, how are you getting some food sources for them?
So it's actually great. We have a local market that actually gives us some of their leftover produce, and that's great. A lot of our food here is donated. And we get meat that something's happened and maybe it got a degree too warm for human consumption. So we get it because we can use it here. But we've been very lucky with all the wonderful partners we have that help us get food for these animals and donate things. We don't actually spend a lot of money on our daily food. Every now and then we have to, but for the most part, it's donated, and they are awesome. They contribute a lot to this park.
I have to imagine it takes a tremendous amount of teamwork to be able to organize your staff and interns and volunteers to make sure that all of the animals' needs are met. That seems like quite the undertaking.
Absolutely. And if you add to that the fact that we're also running a park, and we've all got all those other duties that don't have anything to do with the animals, it can be pretty overwhelming on certain days. We're really busy, and so we're trying to deal with the public, help them answer any questions they have, as well as take just as good a care of these animals. So it can be a pretty overwhelming task sometimes.
I want to encourage everybody who is watching, if you have any questions, you can type them in the chat any point in time, or if you've been to the wildlife park, maybe share some of your stories and experiences. So Howie, you just mentioned visitors. How many people come through those gates every year?
So, of course, the pandemic has affected this a lot, as everything else. Before that, it was around 120 to 130,000. On a really busy non-event day, just a regular busy day, we'll have 1,000 to 1,500 people here. We're open for about 7 months of the year. And it's generally, pre-pandemic, it was around 120 to 130,000 people. Last year, it was only about 40,000 because of the pandemic. So.
Wow, that's an incredible number of people walking around.
It really is. It can be really, again, can sometimes seem overwhelming, but the park's been here, and it seems to run itself sometimes.
It's a fantastic educational opportunity, especially if it's funny when my parents come to visit, they always say, we don't see any moose. We live in Mid-Coast, so it's not very common to run into them, but you're guaranteed to see one at the wildlife park.
Absolutely. That's kind of our claim to fame. And there are actually some places that will do moose tours, and if they don't see one in the wild, they'll stop here on the way by, so they actually get to see a moose, because you're guaranteed that here.
So a question did just come in. How can people donate to the park? Or I guess, how can they contribute to some of the enrichment or some of the ways that you care for the animals? What are some ways that people can contribute?
So contributing just by visiting is a big part. That way it's a little bit of something for everyone. You get an experience and you learn something about animals, and you're also supporting the park. We have a lot of our money is also based on donations. People can join the Friends of the Wildlife Park, which is the volunteer organization that supports us, and they are awesome. And they're a nonprofit. So they can donate time, they can donate money, they can visit. There's a lot of things you can do here. And you could, I suppose, just do that on our website. You can contact us, send us an email if somebody is interested, and we'd be happy to answer.
Having a little bit of difficulty with Howie's internet.
Is that mine?
Get him
Can
back
you hear
on.
me?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Oh, I'm sorry. You froze and I didn't know what happened.
No, sometimes I know that the internet at the wildlife park is not always consistent.
That's an understatement.
No, that's great. So we do actually have some more questions coming in from the audience.
Sure.
Another is, do you have a favorite animal?
I usually have a few kind of, and it's more about, as opposed to species, it's more about personality. Miriam has got to be one of my favorite. That's our beaver. She's just, I don't think I've seen an animal with that much personality before. Byron is definitely one of them. He's our moose. And our fisher, Willie, he's not, fishers tend to be a little bit, they have a bad rep for being a little bit vicious, and they are a little bit just aggressive. And this particular one is not that way. And he's just been great. He's been great to deal with. So I guess those would probably be I always have them. It depends on what day and who's standing in front of me.
They're all great. I think
Exactly.
what's really critical is what you just said, that people might have a preconceived notion about wildlife or what to expect. And the park offers educational opportunities, and these animals really become ambassadors for their species.
Absolutely. That's what we're here for, you know?
So another question came in, are dogs allowed in the park?
No, pets are not allowed in the park at all. It actually upsets our animals pretty bad sometimes. So, yeah, we don't allow pets.
And another question about feeding. So you did mention earlier that you used to have feeding stations for animals, and the question is about if they become accustomed to humans. I mean, I assume they do because of the nature of their life at the park. Can you just talk a little bit about how do you try to keep them as, I guess, wild as possible?
So in some ways we don't. Once they come here, there's no real purpose for us to keep these animals wild, because it simply makes care more difficult. The more accustomed they are to us, the easier it is for us to deal with them. So once they come here, as I said before, with the exception of the fawns that might leave, they're here generally for the rest of their life. So we're not trying to, it's a very hard line to say that we're not trying to keep them wild, but we're also not trying to make them pets. It's kind of, we're trying to keep them accustomed to us enough that we can care for them and do what we need to do. We try to do a lot of things without, like trimming the feet on a moose. It's a lot easier if we could just do it as opposed to having to anesthetize them just to trim their hooves. So it's a fine line between being pets and being able to care for them.
Right, they're not pets. And I think there are some new people who have joined the conversation, and I will just remind everybody that the wildlife at the wildlife park it's their last resort, I guess, is this location. They're not kept. It's not a zoo. They're not intentionally there. It is because the result of something, an incident or abandonment or something along those lines, correct?
Correct. That's absolutely correct. Again, that I think is our niche.
We do have someone wondering if this video will be posted later. It absolutely will be available on our YouTube channel. What do you have for nocturnal animals at the wildlife park?
Right now, all we have is some flying squirrels. They're northern flying squirrels. And we have them in an exhibit that we built a few years ago. It's called our nocturnal exhibit. And right now, that's all it's in there. But it's a new exhibit we built that actually does a pretty good job of reversing the light cycle without affecting their life too much. So it's a pretty neat little exhibit.
Is caring for nocturnal animals a little difficult?
We've got them pretty well switched on their day schedule. So they think, so when you go into this exhibit, it's actually quite dark. And you come back around and there's different wavelengths of light. So you can just see, but they still think it's nighttime. So they are actually active during our daytime. And then the light cycle is automatic. And if you go in there at 1 o'clock in the morning, it's like bright sunlight to keep them more on our schedule so people can see them.
What are some of your favorite parts of the job? I assume that being able to work with such great animals is part of it, but do you have any favorite pieces of the job that you do?
Oh man. I think sometimes my favorite is just to see how many people want to support this, how many people want to do the best they can for these animals. It's not always easy to do, but watching everybody work together to try to support the park, that's probably my favorite part of the job.
Absolutely. Oh, we have some more questions coming in. Any programs that allow for one-on-one interactions with the animals for the
Nope,
public?
nope. Not to give too short an answer, but we don't do that.
Do we, I believe the park did offer photographer passes, but that's not interaction, but it was kind of a one-on-one tour. Am I wrong in thinking that?
It was something we offer. We don't right now. And I don't know that we will be going back to that. And even that, it was not any kind of interaction with the animals. It was essentially somebody to take you to places where you could get a better photograph. That's what it was for.
Great, thank you. Another question is, does the beaver build with sticks? So does the beaver do beaver activities in its enclosure?
Absolutely. If you look at it, so we make running water. We gave a place for her. We put in a big new filtration system last year that the Friends of the Wildlife Park helped pay for. The water's always moving. We build a basic house, just a little thing to protect so we know she's okay. But if you look at what's built in her exhibit, it is all built by her. We have a small box that's underneath it all, but she has built this enormous lodge, and she is just as busy as a beaver. It's amazing how busy they are, how industrious they are.
That's great.
She's probably one of the best to watch.
I can tell that everyone at the park has kind of a soft spot for that beaver, because
Absolutely.
anytime I talk to anyone from the wildlife park, they talk about the beaver.
Absolutely.
Another question came in. I know you touched on this a little bit at the beginning, but I do know we have some new people watching. How many species of animals are at the park? And you could go through kind of the list of the species that you have again.
Sure. So there's around 30 different species of animals and around 80 individual animals. So I'll go through real quickly. For the small mammals, we have raccoons, groundhogs, beaver, porcupine. We don't have a skunk right now, but we do sometimes. For the cats, we have mountain lions, bobcats, lynx. For the canids, we have red fox, gray fox, coyote. We have black bears. We have moose. We have white-tailed deer. We have about 15 species of raptors. And then we have a songbird exhibit with about 10 species in it. And then we also have our turtle exhibit. Sorry, I missed one. And we have some really cool new outdoor turtle exhibit tables that people can that's about the closest interaction they can get to an animal here, but they can be right next to it and watch it. They're pretty cool.
Again, I'm kind of repeating some questions, but
That's
they are asking what COVID
Right.
restrictions are in place. We did start the conversation with that, but we can loop back. What can people expect for how they can be safe at the park this summer?
So right now we've lifted all of the reservation requirements. The masks have to be worn only indoors. It's still a state policy for indoors in a state building, have to wear a mask. But outdoors there is none. We're trying to keep the traffic one way as much as we can to kind of eliminate congestion. We're going to be doing our programs in a different place, so we're not interrupting traffic. And we're just trying to keep the pattern so people aren't quite so congregated. And we have hand sanitizer everywhere. Sorry.
And I will mention too that over the last few months and weeks, there were several virtual YouTube presentations that were hosted at the wildlife park. Am I right in thinking
Yeah,
that?
that's correct. Yes. Yes, absolutely. And those can be viewed also.
Yes, those are available on our YouTube channel, so you can definitely check those out. I think most of them are hosted by Jade and
That's correct.
at different exhibits throughout the wildlife park with
Be a good place to see Miriam. I know she's in one of them at least.
Oh, good. Yeah, so you can see the very performative beaver that we have at the wildlife park. So any final thoughts or anything that you want the audience watching to walk away with, Howie?
Just that this is a very community supported place where you can really learn. We're here to support IFNW. They support us. We support them. We support the mission. This is a great place where a lot of people come together to educate people about wildlife.
Absolutely. So I hope that everybody will check out some of those links that we provided in the chat. And unless any questions come in the next couple of minutes here, I think this is everything that I wanted to cover with you this morning, Howie. And it seems as though sort of the chatter calmed down in the comments section. I want to thank you so much for talking with me this morning. I think this was a great conversation about the wildlife park and what people can expect there. Can you just go over real quick as a kind of a wrap up the hours and
Sure.
those things about the park so that people can plan their visit?
Sure, absolutely. So Saturday through Wednesday, our hours, the gate is open from 9:30 to 4:30. The people have to leave the park. They can stay in the park until 6 o'clock. On Thursday and Friday, the hours at the gate are 9:30 to 6:30, and people have to leave the park by 8 o'clock. And we're open 7 days a week, rain or shine. We're open holidays. And the only thing that closes us is dangerous weather. That's it. So yeah, and it's $10 for adults, $7.50 for children and seniors. 2 and under are free. And yeah, I think that's it.
Great way to spend the day this
Absolutely.
on one of the cooler days this summer.
Absolutely. And it's cheaper than going to a movie.
Yes, and it's an awesome experience. Lots of great educational opportunities. And of course, you can see the great species that we have here in Maine. Well, thank you so much, Howie. I hope you have a great day. And thank you everyone for joining us at home.